So first, today we'll discuss about image related commands. So what is Docker image? Just to get a understanding of what is Docker image case. What is Docker image? So what is Docker image? It's a package. It's a package which contains everything to run a piece of code or application. Application code plus runtime. Basically softwares. Softwares plus whatever it is. So what is the command to create a Docker image? Yesterday we used Docker build -t image name, and the last, this dot represents current directory and also the Docker build context. So the dot represents current directory and Docker build context. So this is basically our repository details plus the version of the image. So in case of private repository, it will be something like this. If you are using some private repositories like nexus.tcs.com slash your repository name version, something like this. Or sometimes you see IP address. Your next, suppose your Nexus is running on this IP. In case of private repository, it will be something like this. In case of private repositories, it will be repositories will be something like this. In case of public repository, Docker Hub, we tagged something like this. Docker Hub, username is nothing but your repository name. Something like this. In case of Docker Hub. In case of Docker Hub. In case of private repositories. Something like this. We are going to create an image, something like this. So where should I execute this command? Can I execute without Docker file? Can I execute this command without having a Docker file? No, we need a Docker file, right? And since I'm representing dot, whatever is there in the current folder, the files, right? It will be sending to the Docker daemon to to create the image. This is Docker build context. Docker build context. Whatever files you have in that current directory, it will send to the Docker daemon. So based on the Docker file, it will copy whatever files is required to the image. So Docker build we will use to build the image, something like this. If you see, if I execute something like this, Docker hands-on slash something like this, maven hyphen web hyphen app. If I see, now what is the meaning of this one? Why we are getting error? Docker build hyphen t Docker hands-on maven web app dot. It is looking for one file called Docker file. There is no Docker file here. There is no Docker file here. Now I can say something like this. It is inside this. It is inside this folder. But if you see, why it is not failing, why it is not working? Because even though I give hyphen f, the path, it is looking for a maven web application var file. So do I have a var file? Basically, is it part of this current directory? I mean to say, I said dot. So whatever I want to copy, it is not in the current directory. Basically, now it is sending all the files, whatever files we have from this directory, but the path is not correct, right? The path is not correct in the Docker file. So basically what we do most of the times, we will execute this Docker build command from the folder where you have your files, whatever files you want to copy. I will go inside this. Here itself I have a Docker file, and also whatever I am trying to copy. Do you see that folder also here? Whatever files I want to copy, that is inside this target folder. So do I see that one here? So now if I say something like this, dot, I no need to give this one because I am in the same directory. Now all these files will be sent to the Docker daemon, but it will copy whatever is we have given here. So this is Docker build context. I mean to say build the Docker image from this context. Now dot represents current directory. Now if you see, it is able to copy this one since I have this one in the current directory. In the current directory, I have this one. So this is the meaning of Docker build context, right? If I whatever files we have in the current directory, that will be sent to the Docker daemon. So this file is basically, if you see this folder and this file is part of this current directory. If you miss this one dot, we will get something like this. Basically, if you see, we are getting this error. Build requires exactly one argument. Basically, what is missing? The path, the build context from where it has to build, that is missing. Okay? You can use something like this. So now this is how we can build the Docker image. Now how to see how many images are there? We have these commands actually, Docker images or Docker image ls. If I want to see how many images are there in this system, if you see Docker images. So basically, why we are giving name? If I want to push the image to the repository, if I don't give the details, suppose let me give something like this. Let me build something like this. I don't give this one. Now I am creating something like this. I have an image. Now if I try to execute Docker push, if I execute Docker push, will it able to push? Does it have any details like what is the repository, where to push the repository? This is our image. Does it have the repository details like where to push? Right? It will not able to, Docker will not able to understand to which repository it can push. So while creating a image, basically we are tagging image with the repository. If I give something like this, it will understand it has to push to the Docker Hub, this repository. Now if I execute, now I will get error. Even though I log in, right? It cannot understand in Docker Hub to which repo it has to push. I already logged in. So, 1 second, Docker and so on. So even though I authenticated with this repository, it cannot understand where to push. So that is why we have given something like this. Okay. So now, if I want to see how many images are there in the server, in this server, in the Docker, in this server, how many images are there? I can see by executing Docker images or Docker image ls. How many images are there? Suppose I want to tag, basically I want to tag with a different name. I mean to say, I want to rename this one. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. You want to rename this one. So that is possible. Something like this. Docker tag new name, new tag, something like this. Something, just I'm giving new name, new tag, and you can give world name or ID, image ID. You can give image ID or this image name. So you can give this ID, world, basically image ID, or you can give something like this, including version. So reverse, I have to give reverse. First world name, or ID, then new. Something like this. Now, if you see, I tagged with this one. But if you observe, guys, does we have three images. We have a three different images. Our image is same, but with the three different names. If you observe correctly, do I have a three different images? Our image is same with the three different tags. Image is same, but three different tags. If you see image ID is same, three different tags. So Lakshmi, you are saying, sir, if we have some image name as the library name, what is the library name here? What is the library name here? You can give any name. That is just a name. Whatever you want to give. If I want to give something like this, I can give, but it will not work. I can give something like this, Maven web app hyphen Maven web app. If you see, I got this one. If I try to push also, it will not work, because do you have any Docker Hub repository with this name? So it's just a tag. You are tagging, but you have to tag with the correct repository names, correct repository names. If you want to push and pull, it will not work because you don't have any Docker repository with this name. So this is just a name. I can give anything, but it should be a valid repository name so that I can push. So we don't have a repository with this name. Do I have a repository with this name, Maven web hyphen app, right? If repository is there, then only it will work. Otherwise, it will not work. So basically, we are tagging with repositories. If I have a private repository like Nexus or JFrog or AWS ECR, so I can tag with that repository and I can push. So this is repository name. I don't have a repository with this name, username basically, Docker Hub, right? If you see hub.docker.com, this is my repository, Docker hands-on, right? So I can push only with this and then I can give the name. If I try to give just Maven web app, I don't have a repository with this Maven-web app here. So it will not work. So now,
Sir, what I'm saying is, let's say if I'm having same repository name, which is already created, and then in that case, I think it will work with that push documentation.
that's what I said. If you have, it will work. But do we have?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we don't have. Yeah.
That is what I am saying.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now I want to see how many images are there in this server, not in the repository. Docker images or Docker image ls. So This will display how many images are there. Guys, if you see, where are these images? So, where are this data? Where it is in this server? I cannot see it as a file. If you see, if I see ls, it is not showing here. If I go inside this one, if I say ls, I don't see this one as a files. Basically, as I told, image is nothing but a layers of the files. Where Docker is maintaining all these images related information in this server. What is Docker working directory or Docker root directory? What is Docker root directory or working directory? This one, where lib Docker, where lib Docker. So if you see, it has some folders. So image related information, containers related information, right? Volumes related information, network related information, everything will be part of this Docker home directory. So it is part of, all the layers are part of this. These are the layers. So image name and it layers details will be part of this, but all the layers will be maintained as part of this directory. So varlib Docker. This is the working directory of a Docker where it contains all the image related information, containers related information, volumes related information, network related information, right? All the details is part of this varlib Docker. So whenever we are pushing and pulling, it is pushing all the layers of that image. And whenever we are pulling, it is pulling all the layers of that image from the repositories. In interview, they are asking, how can we see the layers of an image? How can we see the layers of an image? We can execute this command, Docker history image name or ID. Docker history image name or ID. So if I execute Docker history image ID or image name basically. So it is showing all the layers of this image. If you see, what is the top layer, guys? If you see what is the top layer of this image, 5.34 MB. So what is the top layer? We copied one file, right? That var file, that is the top layer. So we are getting Java, we are getting some softwares from the base images. We are getting some softwares like Java software, Tomcat software from the base images. So all these layers makes an image. All these layers makes an image. So Java software, Tomcat software, and our application, all these layers makes an image. So how to see the layers of an image? By executing this command, Docker history image name or image ID will show the layers of our image. So now how to push? Suppose I created an image in build server. I created image in Jenkins server. Now I want to push to the repository. What is the command we used? What command we used to push the image to the repository? Docker push image name, image name, or you can use image ID. But you should have an image with the tag, guys, repository. But will I able to push without authenticating with repository? Will I able to push without authenticating with repository? No. So what is the command? I can use docker login -u username -p password. But if here we are not mentioning to which repository it has to authenticate, I am just giving username, we are just giving password. We are not mentioning to which repository we are authenticating, to which repository it will authenticate by default. If you see, am I saying whether it has to authenticate with Nexus repository or JFrog repository, private repository? I am just using docker login -u -p. It will authenticate against which one? With Docker Hub by default. But in real time, we will not push our images to Docker Hub. In real time, we will not push our images to Docker Hub. So then, how can we use username -p password repo URL, something like this. Something like this. Something like this. Just your repository. Something like this. So what is this? Or this? So repository details. So let me show you, since we are already aware about AWS, I will use AWS private repository. In AWS, we have one service called ECR. In AWS, we have one service called ECR. ECR, Elastic Container Registry. What do we maintain here? What can we maintain? Repository. It is basically a private repository. So here, let me create a repository. So let me create one. So I will say I want to maintain this Maven web app. So I'm creating a repository. Now I want to push images to this repository. Now I want to push images to this repository. This is private repository. In AWS, we have a ECR, Elastic Container Repository, basically. So I want to push. So now, what is the URL I have to use? What is the URL I have to use? I have to tag with which one now? This is the one. This is the one I have to use. With this, I have to tag. Now let me tag. While creating itself, you can create, guys, or you can tag. If you want to, while creating itself, you can create with this one, something like this. Docker build -t, like I am giving a version. While creating itself, I can use. Now, so this one. Now I tagged with private AWS ECR. Now, if I want to push, I can push something like this. I can push something like this. But what it is saying? What it is saying, if you see here, authentication. Authentication is required. Now, how can I authenticate? What is the username of this ECR? What is the password or token for this ECR? How can I get? So I have to execute Docker login -u -p. Then this is my repository. But what is the username? What is the password? How can I get those details? So how can we get those details? If you see here, you can see the instructions. Now, to get the credentials, to get the credentials, what is required? Suppose now I want to get the credentials. To retrieve an authentication token and authenticate with registry, how can I get the token? The basically the password. Username is AWS. If let me copy this comment. Username is AWS. But password, how can I get the password? What is this? The other side. How are we getting, how can we get the password? Login password for that repository. What is this command, guys? What is this? What we are trying to execute? So this is basically AWS CLI. AWS CLI command, right? We discussed last week what is AWS CLI. Guys, please be on mute. If you have any questions, please post on the Skype, the group, basically the group chat. I hear some background noise. So this is, ECR. How can I get the password? By using this AWS CLI command. Suppose but now if I execute this one, do I have a AWS CLI installed? Do you see AWS CLI is installed in this machine if you want to execute AWS CLI commands? Do you have AWS CLI installed in this machine to execute that? No. So let me install AWS CLI. Let me install AWS CLI. We already discussed in AWS classes, right? Just install AWS CLI. So let's get the AWS CLI. Okay, I think I have okay extracted here. That is fine. Downloaded. Extract. So unzip software is there or not there. Let me install unzip software. Now we have AWS CLI installed. But will I able to get the token, guys? Now I have a AWS CLI. Will I able to get the token login? What is required? This is AWS related topics which we discussed last time. So does this machine has a role or user configured? So does this machine is configured with the AWS IAM role or the AWS IAM user? That AWS concept, because this user doesn't have user or role to get the passwords. So now, since this is a server, do I need to configure with the AWS IAM user, or can I configure this one with AWS IAM role to get the passwords? So since this is AWS machine, do I need to create a IAM user and configure with IAM user, or do I need to configure with IAM role? User or role? We discussed last time. Role. So let me create one IAM role. This is AWS concept. So let me create one IAM role. So the use case here, select EC2. Then here, ECR or elastic. So now, guys, if I select this one, ECR read only access, will he able to push, guys? If I select this option, that machine, will it able to push? If even the authenticate, will it able to push? Suppose if I select this one, I can authenticate, but will I able to push? Will not able to push. So for now, let me select full access so that he can push EC2 container registry full access. Now I have created one role, IAM role. Go to my server from which I want to push and pull. Now this server. Now I am trying to push from this server. So let me select this server. Instance settings, security. I think they have go to security, modify IAM role. Now let me select this ECR full access. Now let's see. Now is he able to get the token, authentication token, this machine? Now do you see this is working? Now what can I do? Instead of again giving this much, what we are doing, try to doing here. This command will get the token that we are pipe symbol. We are passing it to this. Okay. So now if I execute this command, now do you see authentication is successful with this repository. Now I can push. Now I can push. Docker push this. So now I am pushing image to the private repository. Guys, will you be able to pull unless until you authenticate? This is private repository. Will you be able to pull even though you know this, right? Will you be able to pull unless until you have an access? Unless until you have an access, you cannot pull. This is private repository. Now if I go and check here in my AWS ECR, now do you see one image? Image tag 1. So this is my image. Suppose in deployment server, suppose I have another server, deployment server. I have another deployment server. Without authenticating, will I able to pull and deploy? I have another server, deployment server. Deployment server, different Docker server. This is my deployment server. Now this is different server. Now will I able to pull, guys? Will I able to pull or will I able to create container in this server? Do you see? Is it working? Am I able to pull? If you give read-only access, yes, you can pull the image. Read-only, you can pull, but you cannot push. So now this is not able to pull because this is a private repositories. That is how it will work, private repositories. But in case of Docker Hub, we created a public repository. I was able to pull your images and you are also able to pull my images because that is public repository. So here also I need to authenticate. Here also I need to authenticate. Then only I can pull. If required, what I can do? Again, I will attach the role for this server also. Now I can execute that Docker login command. Now authentication is successful. Then I can pull and I can create a containers. So private repositories, you have to authenticate to push and pull. So based on your permissions, you will able to push. Based on your permissions, you are able to pull. So now, how are we authenticating? You can use -u also, guys. -u also, and you can use -p, -p, but you need to provide everything, whatever you are going to get. Instead of that, what we are doing, I am giving this password as an input. It is getting a password, login password. That password we are trying to give it as an input, password input. This is your URL. So only once. Now I authenticated, right? Now I authenticated, right? So I can create another version of the image. Now if you see, let me create another version of image. With this repository, we already authenticated, right? Now I can push. So now, if you see, I am able to push if I have an image, right? So we are authenticating only once with that repository. So this is how you can use public repositories, private repositories. Suppose if you want to push and pull to the Nexus, something like this, you can provide your username, Nexus password, and your Nexus repository URL so that it will be authenticated. But does Docker concept is getting changed, guys? Whether you are using a private, Nexus repository or ECR or any other repository, is there any change in the Docker concept? Is there any difference in the Docker commands, public, private, or Nexus or JFrog or ECR? No, concept remains same. So this is how we are pulling and we are pushing. Now, how to see the more details of any Docker object like image or network or volume? How can I see more details of the image or any Docker? Right? I can use Docker inspect if I want to see more details, image, name or ID. I can use this image name or ID to inspect more details. So Docker info will give only the server details, not the image details. Let me come to directory. So Docker info is giving the Docker server details, like how many images are there, how many containers are there, all those details. But I am saying I want to see more details about the images. So we can check something like this. Docker, inspect, you can use this repository details, tag, or you can use image ID, something like this. So now it is saying the layers. So the image details, more details, what are the environment variables has been set for that image, what are the labels, right? So more details about that image. I can see more details about that image by executing Docker inspect. We can use this command to see more details about the image. Now, how can I remove, how can I delete the image from that Docker machine? What command I can use, right? I can use this Docker RMI image ID or name. Docker RMI image ID or name. Remove image. Can we delete an image if there is a running container for that image? So this is also some kind of an interview question. Can we delete the image if there is a running container for that image? How can we delete image from the repository? You can go to the repository, not from the CLI. From the Docker CLI, you cannot delete. You have to go to repositories only. From here only you can delete. From the CLI, you cannot delete in the repository. You have to select this, you have to delete. Not from the CLI. From the CLI, we cannot delete. Okay. And one more thing, guys, can you please rename your, when you are joining WebEx, right? Please rename. I see a lot of different names. I'm not sure who is that guy. Someone just now I got a question from someone. It is showing as my trek, my Tektra webinar. So I don't know who is that guy, right? So try to rename whenever you are joining. Give a correct name. So I am not sure who is that guy. My Tektra webinar. Okay. So if there is a container, if there is a container created, will you be able to delete the image? You will not able to. Even though if you do, even though if you do force Docker RMI -f, do you think it will work? Force. Even though you use -f, it will not work. Let me show that. So in this machine, I don't have any containers. Let me create a container. -d. I'll come to this container related comments. So whatever image, it can be any image. So now I created a container out of this image. Now if I say Docker RMI, if I use tag, if I use tag, what it has done, guys? Is it removed the image? Is it removed the image? Or is it removed the image? Do you see? Is it removed the image, or what is the output if you see here? I use this tag to remove. Is it removed the image? Is it removed the image? What it has done? It has just untagged. Now, Docker hands-on maven web app1, right? So it has just untagged, but image is still there. Now, can I delete using this ID, image ID? Now, container is created using this image ID. Can I delete? Even though if I say -f, now do you see, is it deleting? If I use repositories, it will just tag, it will remove the tag. It will just remove the tag. It will just remove the tag. So now do you see, is it able to delete? It will just remove the tag. So we cannot delete the image if there is a running container. Even though if I force also, it will not work. And also one question in interview they are asking, what is a dangling image? What is dangling images or dangling image? This is also one of the question in the interview they are asking. An image which doesn't have any tag, or basically or image which is not tagged with any repository. So this we call it as a dangling image. So image which doesn't have any tag, there is no impact, right? There is no impact because your container is still running. Just a tag is getting removed. You are trying to delete using tag, so tag is getting removed, but you cannot delete using ID. Basically, this is pointed to this image ID. So we are just removing the tag. It is tag is getting removed, but we cannot remove the image. If I see, if I forcefully also delete using ID, I cannot delete. But if I stop and if I delete, I can delete. So this is what we can do if you want to tag. We already used, right? We already executed one command. What command we use to tag? What command I can use to tag? Docker tag ID or name, new name. So this is what we can use. So now there are some prune comments. There are some prune comments, very important comments. Like I can execute this command docker system prune or docker image prune. What it does? If I execute docker system prune, what it is saying? So if I execute this one, it will delete all the stopped containers, all the networks which are not in use. We will discuss what is network in the future sessions. And also it will delete all the dangling images. What is dangling image? So let me show you how it will become a dangling image. Let me remove everything. Guys, I'll come to this command. I'll come to these commands. Now, I don't have any images. Now let me create a container. It will pull the image from the repository. Any image, maybe public repository. Since this image is not there locally, I think there is a typo, Docker answer. Since this image is not there locally, it is pulling from the repository. Since this is a public repository, it is able to pull. You can pull without authentication also. Now there is a container. Now if I execute Docker RMI with this name, what it is saying? Unable to remove repository reference. You can force. I can force with tag. I can force with this. But will it delete the image? If you see, forcefully I deleted. But is it deleted the image or just the reference? Is it deleted the image or still I have a image? I still have a image. I still have a image. So now, what is this? What is this? What can I call this one? Can I call this one as a dangling image? So we call this one as a dangling images. Right? Suppose I removed something like this, but will I able to forcefully remove using ID, image ID? Just it got untagged, but will I able to remove forcefully? No. This we call it as a dangling image, image which doesn't have any tag. So if I want to clean up my Docker server, if I want to clean up my Docker server, I can execute this Docker system prune. Image prune, only dangling images. It will remove only dangling images. It is not able to delete this image because there is a running container. So it is not able to delete this dangling image because there is a running container. Now let me remove the container. Now let me execute Docker image prune. Now do you see it has deleted the dangling image? Guys, this is also asking, they're asking in the interview, what is dangling image, right? So an image which doesn't have any tag. So we have these comments: Docker image prune, Docker container prune, Docker volume prune. So basically, this image prune, it will remove only dangling images. When it comes to this Docker container prune, it will remove only this all stopped containers. Network, it will remove the networks which is not in used by any container. But this is, we should not don't delete or don't execute this unless until you have a clear instruction. So we will discuss what is volume, why it is important, right? We will discuss later. So if I want to clean up my Docker server because there are a lot of unused images, there are a lot of unused containers, it will take some disk space. So how can I clean up? By executing this prune commands, so that you will get some storage back. Now if you see, it has removed almost 0.5 GB of disk space. Right? If you have some unused images, dangling images, you can clean up by executing these commands. Now, in recent interview, they asked this question, guys. One question here. I have two servers. Let's assume this is build server. Let's assume this is deployment server. This is your build server, this is your deployment server. So here you have created a image. So you have executed in this server Docker build -t image. Now I have a image here. I have a image here. Now, how can I move this image to this server? How can I move? I mean to say, how can I? Now I want to deploy this image as a container here. How can we move? Can we SCP? Is it possible to SCP the image as is? Can I SCP the image? I don't see that as a file here. I don't see. So how can I move? Basically, from here to here. If you see, suppose I have an image here. I have an image here. I don't have any image. Now I am trying to create one image. So image is not a file, it's a layers of multiple files, right? It's a layers of multiple files. If I execute here normal, am I able to see that image as a file, whatever I created? Am I able to see this image as a file like a tar file, zip file, right? It's a layers of multiple files. So how can I move? As of now, what concept we are using? We are using repository concept. We are using repository concept as of now, right? What we are doing here, we are authenticating Docker login to the repository, then Docker push. So we are pushing the image to the repository. And here, what we are trying to do so far, we are pulling. We are trying to execute Docker pull. But if this is a private repository, will I able to pull without authenticating from here? If this is a private repository, here also I need to authenticate. Now the question they were asking, without repository, how can you do that? You don't have a repository. If you have a repository, you can do this. But in real time, we will have a repositories, but they ask the question to understand your Docker commands knowledge. In real time, we will have a repositories. We will push images to the repositories wherever you want to deploy, you will pull and deploy. So without repository, how can we do that? That is what they are asking. I cannot SCP as is. What I can do, there is a command called Docker save. There is a command called Docker save. I can save this image as a tar file. I can save this image as a tar file. Something like this. I can execute this command so that I will get a tar file out of that image. If I have a tar file, can I SCP the tar file, guys, from here to here? If I get a tar file, can I SCP the tar file from here to here? So we got some tar file. So SCP the tar file. The username of that server and IP address of that server, wherever you want to copy. Now tar file will be copied here. In this server, there is another command called docker load. We can execute this command. So there is a command called docker load -i input. This is my tar file which I copied from here to here. So what this load will do? This load will create a Docker image out of the tar file. It will load the image out of this tar file. In real time, we will never do this because we will have a repositories. But to test the Docker commands knowledge, in 2 or 3 interviews, they ask these questions for our students. How can you move images from one server to another server if there is no repository? If there is no repository, how can we move? Using Docker save and Docker load commands, we can do this. So we can use Docker save or Docker load. Docker save will save the image as a tar file. Docker load will load the image from the tar file. We can use this command. So these are image related commands like pull, push. I can push the image or I can pull the image. I can, if I want to authenticate, I can use Docker login. If I want to remove this, I can remove. Now the question here is, we will not do this, but how can we delete all the images? How can we delete all the images? What is the command we use to delete an image? Docker RMI. So Docker system prune -a, is it going to delete all the images or only dangling images? So let me show that. Let me show that. Let me connect to this server. Docker images. Okay. Docker PS. There is no container. Now Docker system prune. It has not deleted the images. Docker system prune -a. So it has deleted Docker system prune -a. But if the containers are there again, will it delete? If the containers are there again, will it delete? It will not delete. -a is deleting all. But again, we can use this command also. What is this? Docker images -q. What this will return, guys? Docker images -q. What Docker images will return? If I have all the images, let me pull some images. I am trying to pull some images. I don't have images. I am trying to pull some images. Guys, never execute these commands. I mean to say Docker RMF, RMI-F, right? In real time. Here we are just learning the commands. So we are executing, we are exploring all the commands. Since we are teaching here, it doesn't mean we are going, we are going to execute these commands, all the commands every time. Okay? So we are just learning. So we are exploring all the commands. Now I have some images. So now, if I execute this, it is returning all the details. But if I want to delete image, I need, you have a Docker file, What about the version? Suppose your code is changed. Your code is changed. You created a Docker image with the current version of your application. Then code is changed. You created a version 2 image with the latest code. We have a Docker file, but whenever there is a change, what is happening? What we are going to do? Are you going to, how you are going to deploy the latest code in Docker? So I'll come to that. Okay, you are saying you have a Docker file. Now, this is your source code. You have a source code. You have a Java classes, Docker file, everything. Now in build server or wherever it is, you created image Docker build -t like version 1 image. Now you deployed that image. This is version 1. Now suppose there is a change, developer has modified the code. Developer has modified the code. He has updated the code and he has committed. He has committed. Now how can I deploy that latest code now? Now Docker file is there, right? How can I deploy that latest code? Now this is having the old code. This image, this container is having the old code. Now what is the process to deploy the latest code now? If you are using Docker, what is the process to deploy the latest code now? As part of your CI/CD, what do you do again? Again, you will clone the latest code. What do? You will again create a new application package. Again, you create a new application package. Then again, Docker build -t. Maybe you will use version 2 because if in real time we will maintain all the versions. Now this I have to deploy. In this server, what we will do? We will remove the container and create a container with the latest image version 2. So version 2 has a latest package. Version 1 has a old application package. So Docker build, Docker push, and again here you delete the old container and create a new container. So this is the process we follow. So basically if you delete also, it will be there in the repositories. Suppose by mistake if I delete also, we will have in the repositories. By mistake if you delete from the servers also, you can have in the repositories. But if you don't have in the repositories and you are not following versioning, if you are not following versioning, what is the meaning of versioning? You are not maintaining all the versions of your images. You are always building something like this. Version 1 always deploy. Again build version 1, deploy. So you will not have all the versions. So in the real time, we will have a repositories. In the repositories, we will maintain all the versions of our images for that application. If something is not working with the latest version, what can I do? I can revert to the previous version of my image. If I have a image with all the versions in my repository. So this is how we will do in a real time. Now if I want to delete, I can use this one also, Docker RMI, Docker images hyphen Q. Docker images hyphen Q will return only IDs of the image. Only IDs. These images I can pass as an input for RMI. Docker RMI, these IDs. So today we discussed about images, image related comments. Okay. So tomorrow we'll continue with container comments. Once you are familiar with comments, then we will go for a Docker file, guys. Maybe day after tomorrow, we'll discuss about the Docker file instructions. What is this? All the Docker file instructions we will discuss day after tomorrow. Tomorrow we will continue with container related comments. So I will share the running notes, how we can map old image if new image is not working. In my project, our DevOps engineer shared, I am mapping old one. Basically, you need to delete the old container. You cannot map something like this. You have to maintain all the versions in your repository. This is version 1 and version 1 image, version 2 image. So similarly, whenever there is a change, you have to build an image with versioning, guys. Whenever there is a change in your image, your code, you have to create an image with versioning. As part of CI/CD, how we are following, right? In our CI/CD, can I get a build number? Can I get a build number? In Jenkins pipeline, can we get a build number as an environment variable? As part of our CI/CD, what we are doing? We are getting a build number. In our pipeline script, whenever I am building image, we are giving that repository details. Just to give an example, let's assume this is your repository, Docker hands-on. So we are using this. Now, whenever we are pushing from our job, same. Now, whenever we are deploying using some plugins or SSH agent, using SSH agent, I logged into that server, or maybe using Docker plugin. What we are doing there, just to give an example, Docker run, same thing. We are deleting old one. You can delete old one if you are directly using containers. Name of the container. And you are creating a container with latest tag. Now in your repository, suppose you have 10 builds. Does your repository will have a 10 images? Basically the image with the 10 different versions. Suppose this pipeline is, your project has modified, the developer has modified the code 10 times. Each time the build will be triggered. Now for each change, do you have an image with that version in repository? If something went wrong with this one, latest, what we are going to do? We are going to deploy from the previous image. You can delete this container, whatever container which is not working with the latest code. you can create a containers from the previous images, whatever you have in your repository. Got it, Rohit? Or you need more details? Are you clear? Okay.
Balaji, this is Amar.
Yeah, but
What are the topics left in this Docker?
Docker, still there are a lot of topics left. We are just in the beginning. We have to discuss still what is Docker file, how to write Docker file, Docker volumes, Docker networks, Docker compose, and the Docker swarm. Okay. So still minimum next, I am thinking it will take another 8 to 10 days, only Docker. After that, we will go for a Kubernetes.
Are we covering any pipeline script in this Docker session?
Pipeline script, which is already there in our GitHub. I will share the links. Try to create a pipeline script. There is a videos already uploaded, but I am planning to do at the end of the Kubernetes. But already there are pipeline scripts which is already available in our YouTube channel. I recommend you to set up that one also. Let me show that. Whenever you get some time, try to go through this. We will. So
So, hi,
this.
Balaji. I think we have one more topic is the monitoring tool for.
Yes, in Kubernetes, that we will do in a Kubernetes. When we are discussing Kubernetes, we will set up Prometheus, Grafana, and we'll see how can we monitor. So that we will be discussing in the Kubernetes. Yes. So there are some pipeline videos in our YouTube channel. Try to go through this one. So we'll set up a, we'll set up monitoring tool when we are discussing about Kubernetes using Prometheus and Grafana. We'll set up monitoring tool and we will see how can we monitor, how can we trigger alerts when we discuss in a Kubernetes.
In the same video, I see Terraform 1. So is that enough for complete Terraform automation, or are there any
No,
more?
no, no. That is just the basics we have uploaded the Terraform. So we have 3-4 videos uploaded. So you can understand the basics and you can explore, but that is not enough to learn complete Terraform. That is not enough to learn complete Terraform.
Yeah, you teach Terraform as a separate course?
Yeah, we are not planning as of now. We don't have much request, but if there are multiple requests for only Terraform, we'll try to plan.
Sure. Thanks, Balaji.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, guys. So tomorrow, before coming to tomorrow, I am expecting you to assignment for today. Create ECR repo, push and pull image to ECR. Okay. So this is the assignment for today. Tomorrow we'll continue with container comments. And once we are clear with containers comments, then we will go for these topics, guys. Okay. If you have any other queries, questions, please feel free to message us in the Skype group or WhatsApp group, wherever you are. Okay. So we'll try to answer. Thank you, guys. We'll continue tomorrow. I have to start another class. We'll continue tomorrow. Thank you.